the H2O Network, purveyors of passion, seeking to expand human consciousness from the deep depths of the universe of your soul.
Greetings, family, and welcome to the H2O Network. This is your host, Dia Nunez, broadcasting live from New York City. I'd like to welcome everyone in the chat room, everyone on the phone lines, and to everyone who will be listening to this via the archives later on. I hope that everyone is well on the East Coast. Yes, we are percolating, family, at 3 a.m., Yes, indeedy, because tonight, well, I shouldn't say tonight, but this morning, I hope that you have wiped the sleep out of your eyes and your ears and perked up, because this is going to be a very, very interesting hour. But before we even go there, family, let me make announcements. Make sure that you go to the H2O Network profile, because you can download us via iTunes and also click on that RSS feed to make sure that you are in the know with all of the wonderful guests that we will be having in 2012 and catch up on what has happened in 2011. Also, family, you know that we are percolating on Facebook. If you type into your search engine DIANUNEZ, that is me. I have two profiles, friend them both. We have a lot of things percolating on the burner. Of course, you know that we're tweeting with all of the esoteric, paranormal, conspiracy theorist, shamanistic folk on Twitter. So type into your search engine the H2O Network and you'll be able to find us there. Also, family, you can email us at the H2O Network at gmail.com. That is the H2O Network at gmail.com. And check out our website, too. There's a lot of funky stuff going down as we are collaborating with esoteric beings all over the globe. If you go to the H2ONetwork.weebly.com, that's the H2O Network.weebly.com. And family, if you feel so compelled within our hour, the hour will go by quick and it will truly massage your brain cells. If you are compelled to, call in to the HO Network just in case you have any questions for our guests at 917-889-7207. That's 917-889-7207, family. I tell you, this is going to be a very interesting show. And as I was speaking to our wonderful guest, Troy Mclachlan, who is the founder of this beautiful website, and I say beautiful because there's a lot of information. Y'all are information hounds like me, where you can really investigate the Saturn death cult. He goes into this in depth. His website is thesaturndeathcult.com. Mythology as natural history and human history as a cult ritual. And let me just give you a breakdown of what this website is all about. Buckle your seatbelts, family. Get your cafe con leche, your H2O, because we are going to delve into some things. I wouldn't say, well, I'm going to say this, some truths of the weird and the bizarre of what's going on in the galaxy and the planet, things for you to think about. And I know that has been the case for me, navigating this website. Very, very fascinating. The Saturn Death Cult is an investigation into ancient planetary upheavals that heralded the birth and destruction of a fabled golden age, following which mankind then disintegrated into the obsessive pursuit of wealth and power through the perverted horrors of slavery, child sacrifice, and mass murder rituals. The website discusses the disturbing occult origins of the planet Saturn and its influence on our march towards the terrifying elitist agenda of justifiable man-made global cleansing. Just from that alone, y'all know how I think. There's so many questions to ask, so I will be bold enough to say, part one of maybe a couple of installments, because there is so much information to soak into your consciousness. And you know that I look at things from a metaphysical point of view. And I would really suggest, family, that you go to Red Ice Creations. Love them. I love Henrik Palgren out of Sweden. He has so many fascinating guests. There are 4 installments with Troy because the cosmology, if you will, of the Saturn death cult, where this mythology came from, where planet Earth sits in this paradigm, if you will, and where we used to be and where we are, is very fascinating and is very complicated. So I suggest that you go to redicecreations.com and listen to the interviews to soak your brain into this fascinating subject and come back and listen to this again, and then when we have our next installment, you'll be able to understand the jig. But let me stop running my mouth and see if Troy is on the line. Troy, are you there?
I am indeed, dear. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing wonderfully. Thank you so much for spending time with the H2O Network. I know that you are extremely busy percolating about, so I'm truly grateful for you coming to hang out with us on the H2O Network.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It really is a pleasure to be with you and your listeners.
Well, first, I've got to ask, when you say Saturn death cult, what does one mean by this, and what is the cosmology of this Saturn death cult that we find ourselves percolating in this physical reality here on Earth now and also from the past?
Right. Well, if I could build on that excellent introduction that you gave to the listeners, what I would say is that my initial reason for writing the Saturn Death Cult website and the Kindle book that accompanies it was to produce an introductory investigation into this radical new cosmology involving the relationship between the planets Earth and Saturn. That's an ancient relationship, I should say. And then looking at its implications for the belief systems of various, what I believe to be malevolent cults, religions, and elite agendas that are based on on an archaic understanding of Saturn worship. But it's also a challenge for those in the more sort of rational fields, if you like. It's a challenge to the uniformitarian view of our solar system's natural history, where people have been taught to extrapolate back into the past based on what they see around them today. So, Saturn Death Cult, as a project, explores the idea that the ancients experienced a very different and frightening sky to the one we see today. And it advances the notion that the mythological record indicates that our current skies have only been as they are for a little more than, possibly only as recent as 2,500 years ago. It then also discusses at length how Saturnian-type symbols and archetypes and the myths that come from what is known as a lost golden age when the god Saturn ruled, how these have been appropriated by these various malevolent interests with their intent on establishing debt-based slavery control mechanisms, mainly to the benefit of a small elite. And the most outward example that I draw readers to once we discuss all the cosmology involved and so on is, of course, the modern example of this being the central banking model of our current finance system and its overt use of very deep Saturnian symbols to create an aura of legitimacy about it. In particular, most, and I'm sure many of your readers will be very much aware, the use of probably the most famous Saturnian symbol, the all-seeing eye, or the Eye of Providence, being stamped on every U.S. Federal Reserve bill. But regards, the mentioned radical cosmology for rationalizing Earth's relationship to Saturn, this ultimately brings us to the conclusion that much in the belief systems of these malevolent occult and religious traditions are in fact based on the rotten foundation of a completely erroneous interpretation of Saturn mythology and, by extension, Saturn worship. So basically, Saturn Death Cult is an attempt to challenge the legitimacy of any claim to rulership by any group who base their underlying belief system on these corrupted versions of Saturn worship. So the cosmology in question stems from the work being done over the last 3 to 4 decades by comparative mythologists who have basically established that a literal interpretation of myth clearly indicates a large and actual planet once rested at Earth's celestial north, where it shone for a time known as the Golden Age, and it shone as a sun in its own right. And to give your readers a sort of a basic context, if I could quote from one of the leading investigators into this cosmology, one Eduardo Cardona, who wrote back as far back as 1978, I'll quote, "The evidence of myth which points to Saturn having once occupied a position above Earth's north polar regions is voluminous. There is not a race on Earth that has not preserved at least one account which states as much. According to this evidence, Saturn occupied a central position in the north celestial regions. It rotated and rotated widely, but other than that, it was immovable." Now, unquote. Now, this is basically what we call Saturn theory, and it is a subset of what is known as the electric universe of the model in cosmology. And it's a science that dismisses gravity as the only, doesn't dismiss gravity totally, but dismisses our understanding of gravity as the only force in the cosmos, and postulates the highly influential role of electricity in space and the role of a substance called plasma in conducting the forces of electricity through space. And as preposterous as the idea of Saturn having once resided in the celestial north and now it's in the farthest reaches of the solar system might sound, it's obviously incumbent on those who claim mythology actually records Saturn as having been our original sun, to come up with a workable model for explaining how this happened and why our solar system, as it is today, has not been this way for billions of years since, in the way that modern science claims it has.
Well, I have to say before you go on, any intelligent human being, this would make them ponder the fact, in this physical reality, Troy, it's very interesting that you say this, because if we have not noticed, especially science, and I had this conversation with Philip Coppens, who was on the History Channel for Ancient Aliens. It's very odd that the scientific community has, and also the religious community, if you will, has a lot of information on lockdown that they do not want to release to the public. They have a lot of artifacts that have now come up to the forefront of this reality, and even before the linear time that we're sitting on, that's literally sitting in the Smithsonian and other museums around the world on lockdown that they refuse to tell the public about. Why is it that the Vatican has, their library on lockdown? Why is it that the Pope has a huge all-seeing eye on his head? So just by the statements that you stated, if you will, really makes one ponder, wow, that's interesting. They really have changed and twisted the course of human history. There's something that they don't want the public and the population on Earth to know about themselves.
Yes, absolutely, and it's one of the reasons why I'm actually very excited to be alive at this time in history, because I see this the systems that produce that have this intention of locking down this knowledge starting to crumble. I see things starting to be released, secrets revealed, and the reason I believe that they have an intention to keep it locked down is because the control mechanisms that I alluded to before, particularly the financial control mechanisms and the religious archetypes that they use to create an aura of authority around these financial systems, they are essentially dead, closed circuits that will eventually implode on themselves. But in the meantime, there are people who have highly vested interests, and it's not just your, the notorious Illuminati types, Golden Dawn people, if you can even bring those people into the equation and so on. But when I talk about Saturn Death Cult, I'm talking about a culture that exists, and it actually permeates much of modern science as it is today, the whole peer review system, and unfortunately I have to say that in the West we are particularly afflicted by this concept of peer review that basically keeps the vested interests of everything that has gone before ticking over in the next generation to come, and it's been a detriment to the growth and understanding for the average individual. But these people have jobs to protect, they have reputations to protect, which bring them in their income and basically give them their status. So Saturn Death Cult as a culture extends even to some of the the sort of the mainstream ideas of society. It extends to how our governments behave, our bureaucracies, I should say, and certainly the bureaucracy of modern learning. And essentially, what I'm saying is that modern science has become virtually its own religion, with its own set of high priests, its own set of dogmas, and to challenge those dogmas, you are subjected to
being blacklisted.
You are subjected to extremely unscientific responses by these people, and I have to say that the tangent that I've taken Saturn theory on, the people who I have read and so on, these are very seriously scientifically oriented people, and they would be somewhat bemused by my going down the road. I would think. I don't have personal contact with these people and such. They are strictly scientists, but I've noticed that they themselves have been subjected to extreme attacks on their reputations, their personal reputations, and so we see this culture at work trying to maintain a status quo that is basically a closed and dead system.
Indeed, but you know what? It is not only our financial system. I think that it's every system on Earth, the health system, the educational system. There are a lot of things that are actually crumbling down. And
absolutely.
I also find talking to other researchers, if you will, in different fields, especially in the indigenous, because the HO Network deals in the indigenous and in the metaphysical. A lot of elders, if you will, are now from these ancient traditions that were around when we had a different view of the sky, are now coming out with their information. For example, the Dogon, I talked to Shannon Dore, who is the author of the Nomu, and talking about these beings and things of this nature and what the skies look like. So there are a lot of people who have really been silenced and have protected certain information for a period of time here on planet Earth. But now, because we are literally standing in this magnificent time, there are a lot of people who are literally coming out to the forefront, spilling the beans. So the way that it stands now, you see Rome falling as we speak. So it's a very exciting time, like you stated.
Oh yes. I think we're in for a lot of danger being present in, particularly in the material world and even the spiritual world. But I do believe that it's all a harbinger to a failing of the system that has repressed such knowledge, and certainly the pursuit of knowledge in an open way.
Absolutely. So let's get onto the cosmology, if you will, of the Saturn Death Cult and what that means, and how these the cosmology of the Saturn Death Cult is permeating and hidden in plain sight, basically.
Right. Well, basically, the cosmology is based on events that took place before what mythology tells us was the end of a golden age. And this golden age places, as we've discussed, Saturn as a sun in its own right in Earth's celestial north, that area where the stars don't seem to move. Currently, Polaris, the star, is closest to the center of what you would call celestial north, not to be confused with magnetic north. And if you take them at their word, the only way to describe the configuration of a planet-like body shining as a sun in that position is to call it what's called a polar configuration. In other words, what you have is the almost counterintuitive idea to modern science that you have Saturn, and strung out below it as if suspended on strings are, at least in the beginning, two planets, Mars and Earth at the bottom. And ultimately, when, and we'll get onto this later, I'm sure, when this system comes into contact with the Sun, the birth of the planet Venus in that configuration. So you basically have a string of almost beads, like, hanging under this planet. And modern science and its gravity-driven concepts and that just cannot conceive of this concept. Now, we have seen this phenomena actually take place when the comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 slammed into Jupiter a few years ago. On its breakup, it actually assumed exactly this. It was known as a string of pearls. And it wasn't that the planets were flying in a line with the first one leading the line. They actually lined up and traveled through space, sideways, so to speak. And so we know that it is possible that this polar configuration type thing can happen. But of course, this is at a smaller level than the level we're proposing, which is at planetary level. And so what we have to do is basically come up with a model for how a polar configuration could exist. And this is where the electric universe becomes so important into the investigation of what mythology tells us the ancients saw. And it starts first and foremost with the idea that electricity is conducted through space through a substance called plasma that makes up nearly 95 to 99% of all matter known in the universe. This is largely rejected by modern science, and they've created things like dark matter, black holes, to try and explain how the universe is held together purely in gravity terms. But with the advent of plasma cosmology, we now have a working model that shows how electrical forces play the role in keeping things together. Now, if we take that as an understanding, the next step is to look at the planet Saturn as it exists at this time and see that, in fact, it exhibits what essentially amounts to to all the attributes of a former star. It emits its own light. It emits copious amounts of radiation, radio waves, X-rays, gamma rays, these sorts of things. Its poles, in a complete shock to modern science, are actually warmer than its equatorial region. So it generates its own heat. So it basically is a failed star in its current form. And people have alluded, even in mainstream science, they have alluded to this idea. Jupiter, too, also exhibits certain things, but Saturn in particular has these qualities about it. And, of course, it's because Saturn is identified as this immovable sun in Earth's north by the mythological record that we then have to basically investigate what type of star Saturn would have been. And the conclusion that investigators in Saturn theory have come up with was that Saturn once was a sub-brown dwarf star. And the nature of sub-brown dwarf stars is fascinating because they're very hard to detect, particularly optically, when they're in their star status out in space. We probably have hundreds of thousands of these things closer to us than the closest bright star we can see. But they fill the galaxy, but they're very difficult to detect, and you need radio telescopes to really get a sense where one of these things are. And I would have to say that a lot of the discoveries of gas giants out there, these enormous celestial bodies that science has been telling us about, may actually, in fact, be sub-brown dwarfs. The point that I'm making is that they don't glow like a red giant. They don't glow as a point in the sky. They basically emit energy rather than light, although there is light involved. But they emit energy and making them stars in their own right. Now, if we take this idea that Saturn actually was this type of a celestial body in the past, then what that does is it explains a set of environmental circumstances related to us, particularly by indigenous peoples around the Earth, of a time when Earth was bathed in this purple, dull twilight, and there was only basically there was no incoming light from the stars, and in many of the legends, the sun as it is today did not exist at this time. At best, there is again reference to this dull glow from an object in the celestial north. And essentially what we're seeing there, if you take electric universe models, is what's been described is a system that involves a sub-brown dwarf star where the physical part of the star sits at the center of a giant egg called a plasma sheath, which is kind of like this translucent or opaque electrical force field that exists around the star out at vast distances from the solid surface of the star. And within that space, you can get planets and planetoids existing within that realm. Light from incoming stars is blocked to the interior simply because this plasma sheath that envelops the system, and I have to point out that the sun itself has its own plasma sheath. It's called the heliosphere, but because of the frequencies involved in light output by the sun, it's transparent and not opaque in the way that sub-brown dwarf stars have. So when we see sub-brown dwarf stars from our perspective now on them, we're really looking at the plasma sheath that envelops the solid body at the center. And electric universe proponents, people, physicists, and particularly, I've listened a lot to a guy called Wallace Thornhill, and he says, the very intriguing and very exciting idea that if we were to go looking for extraterrestrial life outside of the current solar system, probably the best place to look would be inside these plasmaspheres that house these sub-brown dwarf stars. And the fact that they are generally, a lot of them are probably closer than the closest red stars and so on, it's a very exciting idea for where to go looking for life outside of our own planet.
So it seems that you're saying, Troy, that we, the ancients, we're not in the same alignment as the ancients. So basically a great galactic shift, if you will, shifted, and and I would even go so far as to say that the sun that we have now and the planets that we have now were not the same as they were, because the planet Earth was actually sitting at a different angle.
Yes, absolutely. And again, when you study the planets, we find that there's correlations to this idea that, particularly when you look at what is identified as the Saturnian planets, Saturn, Mars, Earth, and Venus, they all exhibit the same tilt, same degree of tilt, roughly. Whereas, other planets in the system have very different tilts and so on, which points to Saturn, Earth, and Mars in particular as having a common origin, as opposed to the other planets in terms of their formation. And yes, legend, as we know it, from times. And what I should say here is what I'm postulating here is that there is a period of time when Earth enjoyed an exclusive relationship with Saturn, to a period of time when that relationship was disrupted by coming into the neighborhood of the Sun, which resulted in what is called the Golden Age, where this polar configuration persisted for a period of time. And then we are into the modern era where this polar configuration collapses and the planets scatter to their current positions, and Earth then basically takes up its position as it is. But, when we look at what some of the more ancient texts tell us, I'm particularly impressed with a text like this from the Popol Vuh, which basically says, and I quote, "Like a man was the sun when it showed itself. It showed itself when it was born and remained fixed in the sky like a mirror. Certainly it was not the same sun which we see, it is said of their old tales." Now, to me that stands out massively, that the current sun that is attributed by modern archaeology and historians and so on as being the object of the sun-worshipping religions of ancient times and so on, it actually wasn't that particular sun. It may have, traditions may have been transferred to it, but originally it was this celestial body in the north.
I'm just like blown away, because it seems like we are going through, and we talked about this off air before we got on the air, that we're literally going into a different configuration, if you will, as we speak now.
Yeah.
And we were not, we're technically, it has been said that we're not a part of the Milky Way galaxy. We are actually a part of Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is moving. We are literally shifting into a different alignment. A doorway is being opened, if you will, and this is why I propose that NASA is now, we're getting a different view. We're seeing all of these planets and these galaxies that we never saw before, that we didn't see before we began to move into this new shift in alignment with our current sun and all of these different planets. It's just a very peculiar and interesting time. But going back to the ancients and these texts of proof that Saturn was in a different position, why do you think that they're hiding such information, and now there's this group of people on the planet who is perpetuating certain malevolent type of genres, if you will, on everybody else in humanity, if you will?
Right. The simple answer there to that is that I don't believe they know the natural cosmology that I'm proposing here. I think they're as much victims, a lot of these people, of the scientific uniformitarian view of the solar system, and all they've done is they've basically appropriated these legends and distorted them, and that's the point that I make. They distort them into excuses for control mechanisms, as opposed to sources for knowledge on what the truth of our physical and natural history is. And it's been left up to free-thinking people with access to the mythologies to basically take a non-linear view, to take a lateral approach to interpreting these mythologies. And this is something that, for those locked in the pursuit of their need to control people, well, number one, it's highly inconvenient to them. So, in terms of actually what I would call an actual concerted conspiracy to silence the knowledge, I think it's more related that they just don't want people to know stuff in general.
Right.
as opposed to know something that they know. Because when people start to question, when people start to investigate, and when there is open discourse between ideas and so on, then these people's control mechanisms really start to be threatened.
Absolutely. It threatens the status quo and the hegemony, if you will, and the truth to come out. And the role, and of course the role that money plays as in, it basically boils down, hey, if you don't toe the line, you don't get a job, therefore you don't get to feed yourself and your family. It has those implications, and there are enough whistleblowers and people who have been burned in all fields of research and endeavor that tell us that this is actually how, in particular, the Western scientific world operates. Absolutely. And as far as the cult itself, what does that entail, if you will? Because there are many different mechanisms that they use on the planet. You talk about mass catastrophe, depopulation, the abuse of children. I find it very interesting. When I said that, saw that in your line, I was like, Lord have mercy. I had to walk away and take a deep breath, because it's very interesting. In the United States, you see tons of children disappearing left and right. Where are these children going? What's going on?
Just on that alone, I once did an analysis of the numbers, and I decided to play the game of the detractor and say, hey, it's only 1% of the numbers they're claiming is 1%. And I still ended up with the shocking number of 36 children going missing per day in the United States. Even if you take the numbers of people who say this isn't happening, if you take their position, you still end up with a statistical number as shocking as that. Sorry, not 36, 6 children a day going missing in the United States. And that's the United States alone. This is not including the horrific stuff that has come to light in Europe, what's happening in Africa, I spent many years living in Southeast Asia, and I've seen it for myself how the system has a hold on many of the cultures out there. But getting back to your question, what is it about this? As I say, it's, the Saturn Death cult is about a culture for various types of cults, cult groups and interests to thrive. And what I think your question really hints at is why the death aspect in the title that I've chosen, because it's a very lurid title. Saturn Death Cult. It conjures up these images of groups of people engaging in unspeakable rituals and so on. But the reason for the death aspect in it is that it's there to highlight that those people who believe in this golden age have a distorted view of this golden age that I say is perfectly explained by the cosmology we've discussed. Those people who believe in this golden age and the rule of Saturn are yearning for a return to that time. And basically there is an understanding that in order to enter into a new golden age, a term which will be familiar to many people in terms of things like New World Order, these kinds of ideas. But the idea of us going into, as a species, going into a new golden age often comes with the idea that mankind as he is, as they are, both females and males specify, needs to die to be reborn into a new type of human. And the highly disturbing conclusion that you come to with this is that these occult groups believe that in the literal death of mankind as a way of transforming or even transmuting the human species, an elite part of the human species, into a new type of man. In other words, the next evolutionary step in our development. And key to this, when you dig very deeply, and this of course drives a lot of people into, oh my goodness, this is huge conspiracy stuff and so on. But key to this is the concept that what triggers this transformation is the conducting of ritual, and that the ritual is determined by the archetypes and symbols that have come down to us from the first golden age, and that the correct application will bring about the desired effect of the death of humanity to be reborn into a new type of a new type of human. Now, what that means, in your introduction, you quoted my little catchphrase at the top of the website, the link between planetary catastrophe, which of course is the cosmology we talked about, ancient mythology, and occult ritual, and basically human history as occult ritual. So that when there are a lot of people who look at the various conspiracy theories out there, and they just wonder, why are these people taking their time? Why don't they just do it and control? Why is this huge long history of these people? Why do they spend generations, millennia, planning this? And the answer, in my opinion, to this is quite simply that the ritual is that period of time, that span of millennia, of generations, and that these people are conducting a giant ritual based as much on time, the passage of time, because time is associated with Saturn, as they are with the actual physical parts of the ritual, and that they plan a culmination at some point in the future. Now, there's good indications to believe that we are close to that planned culmination, but that things, I'm happy to say, are not going very well for them. Does that make sense in terms of the death side of what the Saturn death cult is?
Absolutely, because if you look at the planet from a mundane level and also a spiritual level, if you will, there is this huge ritual that is going on. I mean, look at all the blood that has been shed on the planet.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, it's being
done for a reason.
Exactly.
There are enough references when you take when your mind is freed from the idea of the current view of our solar system and history and what has gone on. You start to also read some pretty key religious texts in a completely different light. And, I come back to, stuff even found in the book of Revelation, which says, that the system is responsible for all the blood spilt of all the saints. There are so many references that I have found in various religious texts that make this accusation for this ongoing, system of ritual, I would call it anyway. It's, for most people, all they really see is the business of war, the business of conquest and empire. But really, yes, I couldn't agree with you more. The evidence is really there, even for people who wouldn't subscribe to the cosmology and ideas that I've put out.
Absolutely, and it's like my grandmother used to always say, there's truth hidden in plain sight, and it's very evident with all of the blood that has been spilt upon planet Earth throughout the ages. It just makes you wonder. Of course, there's a greed aspect to it, but there's also a metaphysical aspect, if you will, to this bloodshed that is going on the planet. And you going back to this whole golden age and individuals wanting to go back to the golden age, I find it very fascinating in a spiritual context, this whole new age agenda. There's like two realities that are percolating on top of each other. There is a spiritual thing that is really going down with individuals, and you can feel it. You can see it. People who have gifts, you can see that your vision has changed and what you're experiencing. in the ethers is very much different, but there's also this other agenda that's going on that's confusing people towards this new age, this new human, if you will. But the agenda is basically what you're saying, the Saturn death cult, if you will, in order to depopulate the population, if you will. It's almost like they're using humanity as drones from a psychological, physical warfare aspect to do their bidding. What do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, I would go so far as to say that essentially humanity has become their sacrificial victim for this ritual we call the ebb and flow of history since that time. But I've mentioned in other talks with people that I was highly impressed with the idea when I first heard of Marcus Aurelius, with the idea that ask what is its nature. And the reason that you have this schizophrenic sort of theme going on within humanity as to what the golden age is, you've got people genuinely interested in being of benefit to humans and humans being benefited by a new golden age. And then you've got this malevolent sort of aspect of it that requires death to enter this golden age existence as well. What it really goes back to is understanding the nature of the golden age as it was in mythology. And what I have found, I don't go into great detail on my website on this because it's a very in-depth sort of analysis of it. But it breaks into two aspects, and that is that the memory of the golden age has an immature and a mature understanding. The immature understanding says, hey, it's a time when I didn't have to work. When people didn't have to work, everything was free. I could just laze around, do what the hell I liked, and carry on in that way. I didn't have to worry about where my food came from, and so on. And of course, when you look at the biblical version of the Golden Age story, the fall in the Garden of Eden, we can see that the result of being driven out of this paradise was that mankind would have to, by the sweat of his brow, would the earth be made to yield its fruits. So there is this idea, hey, I want to go back to times when it was easy, and when you're not in the abundance of what the Golden Age represented, and there's very good cosmological reasons why it was so, why food wasn't a problem, and so on. But when you're somebody who wants to have that, your conclusion is the only way I can have that now in the world that we are in at the moment is by getting everybody else to do the work for me. They can sweat to make the earth yield its fruits. And of course, that's where you get the desire to create control mechanisms, financial systems, religious systems, political systems that determine a small elite gets to get everybody else to do the work for them. And this is the use of the malevolent use of archetypes and symbols out of the Golden Age. The mature understanding of the Golden Age is that it was not necessarily a time of total plenty and so on. It was actually a very radical change for humanity, very dangerous time, very frightening time. Like it's there in all birth. There is the element of pain and danger and so on as things get born, and you have to go through that process. And when people came into the Golden Age, what happened was that they were confronted with a completely revolutionary concept, the ability to tell time. This, under the Purple Dawn thing, there was no way to calculate time, no reference point for them to see. Once the Saturn's plasmasphere that cocooned it in this opaque egg-type structure dissipated on contact with the sun, suddenly, the inhabitants of the Earth were exposed to stars, starlight, this new, particularly dark, heavy star coming in from the east. And, biblical accounts, for instance, have always perplexed me until now. Why did the stars and the sun appear on the third day of the supposed creation idea? And this explains this idea that basically when Saturn came into contact with the sun. It novaed. It ejected material that became its rings. The plasma sphere lost its opacity, and humans, for the first time, were given something that they could calculate time with. That's why Saturn has his origins as the god of time. And what time does is it brings about the concept of measure and weights and measures. And of course, weights and measures, or accurate weights and measures, are the beginning of law. And so what I've postulated is that the Golden Age was a time when humans lived under a perfect rule of law. And this goes to the idea that, humans, generally, if you get a room full of humans, you get some people who are more spiritually aware, others who are not. We all have our own degrees of awareness in this area. But what glues us together as a society is the ability to trust each other when conversing and dealing with each other. And that is the essence of law. You need trustworthy weights and measures and laws, basically, to start building a civilization. So the Golden Age really becomes the beginning of civilization as determined by this idea that man could tell time and subsequently develop the rule of law. And for those of us who yearn for a return to the Golden Age on a good point, what we're really yearning for is a time when we can all just get along, because we all respect each other based on a basic understanding of laws that build this respect for each other.
Do you think that since you said that, because there is a constructive and a destructive aspect to reality always, from the mundane to the spiritual, and since you said that, it seems that there, in the first golden age, from a constructive perspective, that there was this spiritual. Not only did man understand time, but there was like this spiritual awareness. It was like the internet. Basically, people were using their physical vessels as the internet. Like if you look at the Dogon, I mean, for God's sake, they knew about Sirius. They knew about Sirius B, and scientists today are still trying to figure out how the hell these people were able to do that. Well, they used the technological facilities that were activated within their consciousness. It's like the consciousness superhighway. So it seems that what I'm hearing you say is that the death cult of Saturn, the malevolent forces, if you will, really don't want the constructive forces to basically, I guess, get an upgrade, because it seems, Troy, that we're going into an age of a better spiritual awareness. And that means many different things. Being able to communicate with each other beyond the artificiality of what has been created. Because don't you find it interesting that the powers that be, if you will, have gone to great extents to disrupt our relationship to what we call nature? There's tons of psychological warfare. There's an attack on food. There's an attack on water. It's like they've gone to great extents to disrupt our biochemistry, our bioelectrical magnetic field, if you will, to keep us from evolving to a certain aspect. So is that how you perceive it as well?
Yes, absolutely, because their laziness and greed leads them not only to want to control us, but to actually control the resources of the planet. And when we go back into the Golden Age, the creation myths that describe this time, of course, allude to Saturn as the source of creation into this new era of existence. And it is the source of creation more than anything that I think these people covered. They want to control it. They want, and so subsequently, this is why they want to control resources. And of course, humans become just merely seen as a resource. But it's why we have this part. And I know we were going to get to a point where we were going to discuss some of the insights of Victor Schauberger, and because this is the H2O concept, I thought it'd make, it's a nice little sort of quote from Schauberger in looking at where we've arrived at in what we call civilization. I'll quote from this: "Civilization is the work of man, who high-handedly and ignorant of the true workings of nature, has created a world without meaning or foundation, which now threatens to destroy him. For through his behavior and his activities, he, who should be her master, has disturbed nature's inherent unity." Now, you have to forgive the sexist language there, because Schauberger was, of course, writing back in the 1920s and the early 30s, so times were different. But I think people can see the general point he's trying to make. And yes, I couldn't agree more with the idea that the malevolent interpretation of what was bestowed on us had to be, by the Golden Age, really has sought to monopolize for the benefit of a small portion of humanity that which should belong to everybody.
Absolutely. And speaking, since we are on the H2O network, and I tell you, Troy, I have a love affair with water. I truly.
Right.
I must have been a mermaid in another life, because water is the essence of life. It is my thing. And there's a reason why this planet is covered with water. There's a reason why our organic being is 85 or more % of water. There's a reason for that. And I know that on Saturn there are large amounts of water. So how does water connect with the Saturn death cult and Saturn itself and this element of the mundane with human beings?
Well, actually, and do we have time?
Yes, we do.
Great.
Yes, we do.
Okay.
Keep it moving.
This has recently become one of the more interesting avenues of research that I found myself going into. I've been a great admirer of the works of Victor Schauberger, who is known within water circles as the water wizard. And, of course, the cosmology of Saturn that I've explained is very much similar to the way Victor Schauberger came to describe water, as opposed to the modern concept that water is this virtual inorganic substance that just gets used in hydraulics and quenches thirst and so on. But we'll come to that, because you alluded there to Saturn and water, and many people do not realize the planet Saturn is loaded with water. Its rings are actually ice crystals, and we talked about this via emails. Very exciting in terms of the cosmology that we've been discussing has been the recent press release by the European Space Agency, where the Herschel Space Observatory has detected a torus of water vapor around Saturn. Now, this can't be seen with optical telescopes, so we never knew it was there. But what it's saying is that Saturn is linked with water. Water exists, and of course, we all know the adage that life cannot exist without water. So if we're looking, it comes as yet another tentative confirmation to the Saturn theory cosmology, and particularly this Saturn polar configuration, that if Saturn is actually such a source of water in its own right, then one can postulate that much of the water that we have on our planet now actually comes from terrestrial sources. And under the Saturn polar configuration model, that water, of course, would have come from Saturn. And that event, when such things happened, when this water transference took place, is integral to understanding what happened when Saturn arrived into contact with the sun's heliosphere, the sun's solar system, and its ultimate breakup, which led to the legends, particularly of Doomsday, the end of the Golden Age, which are almost entirely associated with destruction by flooding, by deluge. And of course, the exciting thing for us, living in this much more safe time than these people experienced, is of course coming to an understanding that that yes, a lot of our water on this planet probably originated from Saturn, and came to us as a result of the electrical umbilical connection that existed between the two planets during that time I call the Saturnian polar configuration.
You know, it looks like that I just got kicked off my switchboard. Hold on one second. Excuse me, family. We are back on the switchboard. Troy was just going into the essence of water. I tell you, family, when you are talking about these fascinating subjects, for some peculiar reason, you get cut off in the game. So, we are going to go back. I just asked Troy before we got cut off, if you will, about the essence of water and the connection of water and the essence of the golden age and things of this nature. So I think that we got cut off when you were talking about this wonderful discovery of the water rings around Saturn, if you will, and it confirms the connection between water and things of this nature. Can you just repeat what you just said?
Yeah, sure. Okay, I'll go back to the recent announcement by the European Space Agency that claims the Herschel Space Observatory has detected a torus of water vapor around the planet Saturn as we know it today. Of course, what this means is that Saturn, we know its rings are primarily made up of ice crystals, and of course the existence of this torus of water, this torus of water vapor, links water to the planet Saturn. It also brings us to the question of the idea that life cannot exist without water. And if we go back into mythology and even further back into the Purple Dawn time and so on, of course, Saturn is very much associated with the creative force that was responsible for life as we know, the environment that we have on the planet, and the planet Earth. And part of that creative force would have had to involve water as much as the electrical discharge activity that took place between the two planets. What your listeners probably haven't picked up is the idea that during a time when Saturn was at Earth's celestial north, it was tied by what amounts to an electrical umbilical cord, between linking the two planets together. And it would seem that there was a transference of water, and there is very good evidence for this, a transference of water that took place between the two planets at times when this umbilical cord was disrupted, which of course would have happened when Saturn and Earth came into contact with the Sun. And as a result of that, we were saying that the Golden Age, which begins with catastrophe and flaring up of Saturn and the appearance of Saturn's rings, which we know to be water being ejected from Saturn as a result of its flare-up provoked by electrical contact with the Sun, that water transference along this electrical umbilical cord between Saturn's south pole and Earth's north pole would have taken place. But also, more importantly, when the Golden Age ends, we know that it ends with deluge, this reference to water being the being the agent for the end of the destructive end of the Golden Age. And so the conclusion is reached that it is most likely that under this theory, this scenario, that Saturn is the provider of much of the water that we now find on planet Earth, and confirmation by the European Space Agency that Saturn is, there's no word for it. It's saturated with water in terms as a vapor in terms of what orbits around it. This is a very exciting discovery for what has been postulated in Saturn theory as to the as to origins of the oceans as we know them today.
Absolutely, it is. And it also makes you wonder about the historical variables when it comes to Earth and the different ice ages, or the ice age in general.
Yes. Yes.
When it comes to Saturn.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, most definitely. The ice age question, of course, is one of those things that can be thrown up against Saturn theory by people who don't subscribe to the idea. Basically, science has determined that we've had at least 4, if not 7, distinct ice ages down through our history, through the development of the Earth. Now, the theory that I subscribe to in Saturn theory as to the cause of the ice ages is that this is a very, very brief summary. So during its purple dawn phase, when the Earth was encased in this cocoon of Saturn's plasma sheath and bathed in a purple twilight with lots of radiant energy. As Saturn was traveling, as the system was traveling through space on its own in a broad northerly spiral out of the Sagittarius subgalaxy, it would have, over the millions of years, and I do believe that the Earth is millions of years old, it would have experienced various electrical episodes in that Saturn's connection to Earth would have been electrically upset, causing minor flare-ups of the sub-brown dwarf star that would later become Saturn. Now, when these disturbances happened, the result was the creation of auroras on the planet. And these auroras are not like the pretty lights that we see today. Under a sub-brown dwarf, they would be incredibly thick, incredibly dense. And these auroras there would be a ribbon of them around what would be called the Arctic Circle of the Northern Hemisphere and the Antarctic Circle of the Southern Hemisphere, these circles that we know of. And the production of these auroras, with their very thick, dense shadowing effect, meant that these auroras simply absorbed the radiating energy from the sub-brown dwarf star that was Earth's sun at that time, and created a shadow around this part of the Earth. Now, it's always been a conundrum to people who study the ice ages. It's and even mainstream scientists will be honest in admitting this. There has always been this conundrum of the ice-free polar regions during ice ages, and we really do have this idea that the phenomena of polar caps is a very recent phenomenon on the Earth. So when we study ice ages, what we actually find when you look at the spread of the glaciation that took place is they actually produce a ribbon around the circling the Arctic Circle regions of both North and Southern hemispheres. And this ribbon of ice left, of course, these northern regions free, which would have received direct energy from Saturn still in this polar configuration. And so you have, during the Purple Age, various episodes lasting hundreds of thousands of years where there are these dense auroral clouds circling the Earth, and these latitudes the latitudes under this dense cloud is cast in a perpetual shadow. And in that perpetual shadow, what water that existed on the planet, and Earth did have its own water, because, quite logically, Earth was originally born as a result of the birth of Saturn itself way, way back in its origins. So it would have had its own water and would have been receiving water even during that time. During this time, the water vapors that existed would have congealed into glaciation under these auroral clouds. Now, what the time spans involved here? Hundreds of thousands of years for the existence of these auroras, but once Saturn settled down, electrically speaking, after an episode like this, and this also coincides with extinction events from the more ancient species, dinosaurs, mammals, things that every school child is entranced by in terms of our ancient past. But the extinction events would have been concurrent with the arrival of these auroral clouds, and when Saturn equalized again with its relationship with Earth, these clouds would dissipate, and you would get the ending of these ice ages. Now, it's my understanding that as Earth and Saturn approached the Sun, an electrical imbalance was already detected, and because these plasma sheaths are vast, the distances are phenomenal, and it's quite possible that Earth originally, Saturn's plasma sheath, brushed initially against the Sun's heliosphere, triggering an electrical event that produced these auroral clouds that were resultant in the Pleistocene ice age, the last major ice age. And then as Earth spiraled away, this electrical imbalance continued. Once Saturn and Earth spiraled away, this electrical imbalance continued and gave us this long ice age. But when Saturn eventually came back into the influence of the Sun and was captured by the Sun as we know it today, that signified the end of the Pleistocene ice age, that magical date of around about 10,000 BC, when so much seems to have happened. And Earth's dense auroral cloud was transformed into another phenomena due to Saturn's electrical interaction with the Sun that became known as the Tree of Life, Jacob's Ladder in later biblical stuff, the Axis Mundi of legend, that linking chain, that auroral column that spread upwards in a line towards the abode of the gods, i.e. Saturn, where it stood in the north. And so subsequently, we enter into the Golden Age.
What is, while I'm hearing you talk about this whole water jig in Earth and Saturn's possible role in this, what does the moon have to do with this? Because, I find it very interesting that all of a sudden, after a period of time, the U.S. government, if you will, and NASA has taken interest, and not just the U.S., Japan, and all of these other people, are like racing back to the moon. And I found it so interesting this week that NASA released pictures of the dark side of the moon, which they never had done before. And I was like, this is very, very interesting. I
noticed that they didn't actually go to the trouble of releasing pictures of the actual landing sites from the from the Apollo missions.
Absolutely. And, another funny thing about what you're saying is dealing with other UFO researchers and their conquest talking about the moon. I also find it very interesting that when they release these pictures that they're always in black and white because they don't want you to see certain things. And, there are researchers who talk about when they actually add color to the pictures of the moon, that you can actually see things that they don't want you to see. So I find that very interesting. So what is the connection between Saturn.
The cosmology of the moon?
Yes, the cosmology within all of that.
Okay, the moon is an enigma. Modern science will tell you that the proliferation of craters on the moon, as we see them, is evidence of its age, because that indicates how many times it has been struck by meteors, and since or asteroids or whatever it is that hits it, over the years, and since there have been so few relative strikes on the moon that have been witnessed, in the last 400 years since the telescope became available to us, it's theorized, it's extrapolated back that by counting craters and giving it the statistical analysis of the infrequency of hits, that the moon is billions of years old, in terms of where it is sat. In a nutshell, Saturn theory places the moon as a late arrival that took place as a result of the breakup of the Saturn-Earth polar configuration, and that this moon may have been a free-floating planet in its own right within Saturn's system before its arrival in connection with the Sun, and that when the system broke up, the moon found itself basically on an erratic course that brought into contact with the Earth, where it was captured by the Earth in its current situation. Now, that's essentially the explanation. What makes us doubt those of us in Saturn theory, what makes us doubt the antiquity of the moon as in its place where it is now, is in fact these craters that exist, that are used as evidence for its antiquity. And the reason we doubt that is, if you look closely, and this is an example of linguistic programming. If they say that these are impact craters, then we see impact craters. But what gets lost in this is that if you look closely at the moon, every impact crater virtually is almost a perfect circle. And ballistics tests, whatever anybody says, shows you that objects hitting other objects with any frequency, round objects, do not always hit at a perfect 90 degrees to their impact point to create a round circle. You only get that round circle look if you get objects coming at it at exactly 90 degrees. So we have to assume that if it's purely down to impacts on the moon creating these craters, that virtually every impact approached the moon at a perfect 90-degree angle. And that clearly is an impossibility with what we know about meteorites, meteors and space dust and so on. The other thing about the Earth's craters is you see a lot of them have these little dimples in the center, all right? And that's crucial for the understanding I'm going to give you listeners in terms of what might have happened to the moon to give it its current shape. Also, when you look at the overlapping borders of these craters, you see anomalies. You see overlapping where an example of it, you think of the Olympic flag, where you've got 5 interlocking circles, all right? If it were an impact, the last crater would obliterate the outside crater wall of the crater that had landed next to. So you wouldn't get that almost Olympic circle effect of interlocking crater walls between craters. Also, we have the rather odd phenomena on the moon of seeing lines of crater impacts, as they're called, in perfect straight lines. Now, as I said to you, if you can imagine a perfect straight line that creates a perfectly circular crater each time, a line of impacts, you still have to have that 90-degree hit. Whereas if meteorites were strafing the moon to create this series of this line of impacts, it would create the same thing as what you see in machine gun fire. You know, when a plane strafes the Earth and kicks up. If you look at the impacts there, it's anything but circular. Now, what's postulated in the electric universe is that when you get a breakup of a system, and when you get celestial bodies that are charged, have different charges of electrical potential, you get discharges between these celestial bodies. And this, in legend, according to Saturn theory, is what is referred to by the cosmic thunderbolts of the gods. And it's no different than on a cold winter's day walking across the carpet in wool socks and touching metal. You get that electrostatic shock that we all hate when that takes place. This is exactly what is happening between planets who come into each other's proximity and trigger these electrostatic reactions that are simply equalization discharges between the two bodies. Now, the moon, unlike the Earth, is currently electrically dead. It's as if it's been zapped into nothing in terms of its electrical potential. And what electric universe theory says, and what Saturn theory says, is that the moon underwent, during the very chaotic breakup of the Saturnian system, it underwent massive electrical discharges on its journey into its place with the Earth, possibly even from Earth and so on, and other planets as it left the influence of Saturn under this breakup. Now, this is the case with Mars as well, and is where we get the archetype of the scarred warrior, the scarred red warrior. The Valus Marinus, that is a huge scar on the face of the planet Mars, magnitudes larger than the Grand Canyon. That particular scar in electric universe talk is the result of a massive discharge of electricity between itself and another celestial body, and is probably, if mythology can be relied upon, the result of a encounter with Venus, the planet Venus. And what you have then is electrical scarring becoming the main cause for many of the geological phenomena that we see, not only on our own planet, but on other planets on the moon. Going back to craters on the moon, for instance, that dimple that you see at the center, the direct center of these craters, and so on. If laboratory experiments show that when you get an electrostatic shock between two surfaces that have a kind of a dust makeup like the moon has and so on, the dimple is the literal liquefaction at the point of contact that takes place at that time, and then becomes a sort of dimple. It's a bit like watching a drop of water fall into a bucket. You get that when you see it in slow motion, and anybody can observe this. When it falls in, there is a part of where the impact takes place. There's a part of, if it drops at 90 degrees, there's a part of the water that shoots back up and falls back into the center. A little sort of circular droplet, smaller than that fell into water. And this, in electrical terms, with the impacts between electrical discharges taking place between planets, this in mythology is the origin of the great thunderbolts of the gods. Mars, or Ninurta as he's known in other cultures and so on, has this weapon that he strikes with other planets, other gods with. Jupiter has his own thunderbolt. Saturn's known for it. Venus has her own variations of this, but it's a constant theme there. So the moon, in terms of its relationship to the Earth, is a very young relationship in the cosmological model that I'm proposing. Mm-hmm. But the role that it plays in Saturn death cult stuff is that the nature of its crescents came to supplant the understanding of the crescent symbolism that we often see in what is erroneously called moon cults and so on, that was attributed to Saturn's rings, or the sun's light hitting Saturn's rings and creating a crescent. And of course it was the rings of Saturn, and we probably need to jump back as to how Saturn produced the effect of time on the planets. When its rings appeared, the sun's encroaching light from the east would, as the Earth revolved under Saturn, the sun's light hitting the rings of Saturn would create a sort of a revolving crescent around the main body of Saturn, and that revolving crescent was constant and allowed people to get the first notion of time calculation. And of course that crescent idea is prolific in the symbology that has come down related to Saturn, but has been appropriated into the moon cult idea simply because the moon exhibits variations of the crescent in the current solar system that we have at the moment.
Indeed, and God, there's so much to talk about. I tell you, you most definitely have to come back to the.
It's a vast subject.
It is a very vast subject, and as you know, going back to this whole water aspect, and you know, water is alive. It is not a dead substance, if you will. It has consciousness, and as you're talking about Saturn and the Saturn death cults, I would imagine that from a certain aspect, these individuals or the destructive aspect has used water in a vortex conscious type of way against humanity, if you will, and probably maybe more, even beyond our own understanding. I mean, how are they using the element of water on Earth, do you think, as far as their
very destructively.
Right.
Very destructively, and it's really a result of this obsession with Euclidean mechanics. They force water into pipes. They take it out of its natural environment. They expose it to light from the sun. And I'm talking fresh water there. They do horrendous things, and you're perfectly right. If you take Victor Scharberger's ideas and so on, this guy who spent a lifetime observing water in its natural state in the Austrian forests, he just viewed water as a living entity. His term was, "It is the blood of Mother Earth," and its movement, or the movement of life, to Scharberger was epitomized by the movement of water when let to find its own natural course. And so subsequently, the fundamental basis of all life being water itself as a living entity becomes something where it should be treated as such. But our advance down the ages, and particularly this need to control resources, has taken the ignorant turn of forcing water into straight-line pipes and all kinds of geometric abominations for water. I mean, nature operates on the spiral, which of course describes a vortex when in the three-dimensional scheme of things, and such. But when you look at nature, you do not see, and particularly the flow of water in its natural state, you do not see straight lines, circles, and points, or all of the things that are the basis of modern mechanical, technological artifacts. For Scharberger, it was the vortex that was at the apex of the understanding of how water behaved, how it transmuted energy, and how, in his opinion, it literally was the means by which matter was created. In other words, water in Scharberger's view of life is the creator of the matter that we see all around us, that is the soil under our feet, right down to our own bodies. And, of course, he appealed to the idea that water is very much a part of human blood, and that the way blood works through our system, the capillary system, the veins and so on, it is also transferred through our body as a vortex. And when we cut ourselves, there is this amazing thing that happens, the forming of the scab, but it's as if new skin tissue, i.e. new matter, is created by the action of blood. And, of course, water is integral in the makeup of blood.
Indeed. And, you know, when you said the vortex, I keep getting this flash in my head of the Fibonacci sequence.
Ah, right. Yeah, I'm not terribly familiar. I have to admit, dear, that mathematics is actually my weakest point and such. So you might have to give a slight bring me up to speed on that.
Well, actually, I'm going to hold that back because I want you to come back to the H2O network, because we're literally like peeling back these layers and opening Pandora's box. And the only reason why I mentioned it's very just peculiar that you mentioned this wonderful discover of water and how it moves in the spiral, and right. I talk about the Fibonacci's because lately I've been having these dreams about the Fibonacci sequence, right. and Spirit is like, go study the Fibonacci sequence and study it in nature, study it in all of these elements, study it on the human body, because it's literally everywhere. And ironically, you talk about Schneeberger and how he talks about the spiral of water and how that works, and now right. You've gotten me fascinated, and math is not my strong point either, so...
Well, it sounds like, you know, the Fibonacci sequence, what I do know of it is very analogous of the sort of parabolic construction of a vortex, the idea of energy starting out wide and imploding into this creative force at its smallest point, which is the area at the bottom of a vortex. And where it's become so exciting for me with looking at it from Schneeberger's perspective, this whole Saturn cosmology, is of course in what I described to you, the arrival of Saturn as a sub-brown dwarf star into the system, and so on, spiraling through space, coming as part of the solar system. We also know that the solar system is itself actually a vortex. People just think it's a disc, like a record, an old-fashioned vinyl record. But it actually travels north at a rate of 40 kilometers a second, dragging all the planets with it, and thereby is a very wide-mouth vortex. Now, it seems everything we go towards the north, which is at the, and our flow in towards the center of the galaxy, but the galaxy itself is also traveling north. What's called the apex, the solar apex, as such, in terms of the sun. And it's this idea that if you flip the universe upside down and think of the interaction between planets, galaxies, planets, their stars, galaxies, and so on, what you're really seeing is the eddies of a vast ocean where there are multiple vortexes leading to bigger vortexes and bigger vortexes, as this sort of energy source literally drains into drains away. So like a series of creative plug holes that the whole of the known material universe seems to be, spinning into. And, Earth's relationship to Saturn was just a smaller vortexual relationship while under Saturn than it is now in with the Sun. And, of course, the Sun is a smaller one in relation to its galaxy. And the galaxy, of course, is a smaller one in relation to the universe. But the scaling up reaches, no pun intended, but astronomical figures, in terms of what you can apply.
Absolutely. And, oh, God, I want to ask you something else, but I'm going to hold my tongue because I want you to come back because, as you stated,
Certainly.
this is a very vast subject, and now I understand why Henrik had you on, so many times because there's so much to talk about, and I really want to investigate, if you will, on the air, this whole vortex aspect of water.
Oh, yeah. It really is, I believe, the secret to really fully understanding the physics of how Earth was able to spin under Saturn for millions of years before its contact, before the system came into contact with the sun. It's become very important to my own researches.
Indeed. So you most definitely have to come back and hang out with us. I know that it's pretty late in New Zealand. I thank you so much, Troy, for coming.
Oh, thank you.
For hanging out. It's like you massage my brain cells. I love this. So I will be emailing you. And family, I will be downloading this via YouTube and editing and things of this nature so you don't have that dead space of us getting knocked off the air. I tell you, when you're talking about these subjects that challenge the status quo, that challenge reality, how ironic is it that you get static and you get dropped off the switchboard? Not ironic at all. So we will make sure that the show is taken care of in entirety, and you'll be able to download it via YouTube, and I'll be posting it on Facebook and things of this nature so you can hear everything in its entirety. And make sure that you go to Troy's website and check out what he is proposing, because it is very fascinating. Really put on your physics, your metaphysics, your mundane reality hats, because it will challenge a lot of the perceptions and the way that you think. SaturnDeathCult.com. Tons of wonderful information, and we will have Troy back. He is doing awesome research. Family, as I always say, when you're percolating in this mundane reality, open up your box, open up your perception of what is, and challenge the status quo. Everything that you see is not always as it is. So, until next time, family, I wish you lots and lots of love, and thank you so much, Troy, for hanging out with us.
Hey, it's been a wonderful pleasure. Fantastic time.
Indeed. Good night, family. Bye-bye.